Hi, everybody. I'm here with Sal Cordova, and I'm really excited. We're going to have a great conversation today about reasons to believe in Christianity. And I wanted to say first who Sal is. So let me give you some information. Sal is an engineer. He's a former engineer in the aerospace industry, and he's also a scientist, former scientist in the aerospace industry. And I'm right now, you're also in the defense industry. He's appeared on national television, radio shows, newspapers, books, and magazines for his work in promoting intelligent design and creation science. He was in the cover story of the April 28th, 2005 edition of the prestigious scientific journal Nature. And so, without further ado, let me say welcome to Sal Cordova.
Well, welcome. Thank you for giving me a chance to talk about my work, and it's also a real honor to be here to meet you, and then also to present myself to the viewers. So thank you, everyone who's joining us live and also through recording.
Excellent. Thank you. So I came across you I didn't come across you watching Nature, I have to say. I really don't keep up with science enough, and so I didn't see you there. But where I did find you was I found you on the Modern Day Debate channel, and I was just really impressed, as I sort of mentioned just a second ago. I was so impressed when I watched you on that debate channel. You were talking about evolutionary fitness, and you had so much scientific knowledge, and it was just shared so well. But what I really also enjoyed was the way that you handled yourself with an atheist person whom you were debating. And I thought that you were just such a good Christian, such a good exemplar for people if they want to follow the Christian faith. And so I wanted to see if you wanted to share your perspective on that debate, or even if you just wanted to share your perspective on if science and Christianity are at odds, because I think that that's something that a lot of people try to say. They try to say that if we believe in evolution, if we think evolution occurred the way that people have posited in the science books, that we cannot be Christians. And so I thought I'd bring you on and see if we could talk a little about that, and also about how you've come to Christianity.
I'm happy to talk and answer your questions. If I forget one of your points, please remind me.
Oh, no worries.
Regarding that debate, one reason that I generally have a nice demeanor to individuals like my opponent is they articulate many of the same concerns and questions that doubting Thomases in the church have. And so when I'm responding to them, I look at myself when I was in the church, and I had those same questions and issues, and I was just longing for someone to teach me and try to explain. And what happened instead was it's kind of an unfortunate thing in churches when for myself, when I began to say I'm having doubts, I'm having concerns, I have these problems, I got ridiculed. I got ridiculed and treated badly. And I said, I will never do that. I'll never do that to someone who's an honest seeker, or in the case of someone who I have very good regard for my opponent. There are certain people I will not really want to have a conversation with. But I had good regard for him, and I felt he represented many of the questions and concerns that doubting Thomases may be sitting in church. And if I went off and was just ridiculing him, it's just like, yeah, that would probably offend a lot of Christians there that are wanting to hear well-reasoned, evidence-based answers. And so when my opponent said something that it's like, yeah, I would have to say that's a really good point. It's worth addressing, because I wish people had done that to me and say, if an honest enough answer when I was in church would have been that, would have been something like this. It's like, Sal, that's a good question. I don't have an answer, but God did something in my life, and that's all I have to hold on to. That would have been perfectly legitimate. But then to go after me and start telling stories about how I'm almost some heretic or apostate, and that was sometimes the bullying that I got. I said that I never wanted to be a part of that. And unfortunately, I see that still happening in a lot of churches, that these are the way that they try to instill loyalty is through methods of socialization, not evidence and reasons. And so that's why I'm very passionate about trying to engage the arguments. And I do try to engage with people that I feel will also be civil. because if they start creating a dumpster fire, that's not going to do the audience any good. And so one thing I should point out, in all the years, about 20 years, I've been debating the other side. Not one of my opponents ever converted. So it's not it's not my goal to try to persuade them. My goal is to conduct myself in a way that will help the doubting Thomases, especially those going through science curriculums. And I know that they would have the same issues that were being raised in the discussion today. I mean, in my debate the other day with Dapper Dino. So there were some other things you asked me, and I apologize. I forgot. It slipped my mind, but you were asking me to talk about also.
Sorry about I put in.
Can we believe in evolution and Christian and be a Christian? I would say absolutely yes. I was a Christian, and I still believed in evolution. I was raised when I became a Christian. I still accepted evolutionary theory. The requirement for being a Christian is to believe Jesus rose from the dead. And then it's perfectly normal for a believer who's accepted Jesus Christ not to know everything that he's taught, not to know everything that's in the Bible, not to resolve every possible question on the planet. And it's also very likely they'll have misunderstandings of things that may or may not ever be resolved in their lifetime. And I've worked with a lot of creationists who had become Christians and still believed in evolution for many years in their life. Some of the most famous, I'd say, I mean, not that I have any way that I could demonstrate this empirically, but my own anecdotal experience is that about 1/3 of the creationists I meet had a very long stretch in their life when they were Christian and also believed in evolutionary theory. But because they were Christian, they were more open to changing their minds because they were willing to entertain ideas of the supernatural. So,
Yeah, no, that's a good. See, I agree with you. I think that I've always thought that there has to be a hand in all of this evolution, and that I think the intelligent design idea seems to ring true for me. If we did get here by evolution, as people have posited, then I feel like there had to be some involvement, because I look at DNA, I look at the structure of DNA, and it looks like and cells, and it just looks like there's a little motor there going on. And how could you think that there's not a designer? So that's one thing that I see. So I wanted to know, Sal, how did you come to Christianity? You said that did you have a spiritual experience, or was it just looking at the evidence, or how did you find the faith?
I came to Christianity at age 15, but I had many doubts for many years. And almost just to be perfectly transparent, every day I have doubts too. It's like, Lord, the world looks really messed up. Are you really going to redeem it? Because it looks really messed up. And but they were particularly severe 20 years ago. But how I came to Christianity, I was raised in a Roman Catholic home, and I was taught the theory of evolution in the public schools, and I was fine with it. Actually, in my own naive view as a grade school student, and not that it represents evolutionary theory as taught by people like Richard Dawkins. But when I was growing up, I was still very hopeful that we would explore the universe, and there would be never-ending improvement. So when I saw these little pictures in the evolution books of bacteria evolving into sea creatures, the sea creatures emerging out of the water, and then evolving into apes, and then to humans, and then they would show pictures of spacemen going to the stars. I said, this is a really cool picture, never-ending progress. So to me, in my own naive view, I said, that's evidence of God. He ordained the universe to just keep improving. Mm-hmm. And so I did not, that was how evolution played in my role of faith. It was very naive, very optimistic, very romanticized. But it's a little difficult for me to talk about this, but I got involved in what would now be called New Age. Back in, the real term is occult, but they've come up with a new label for it. and I was into ESP and stuff, and I was having a lot of psychic problems, and there were times I could just I was very fascinated by telekinesis, and I remember having some telekinetic ability, and but it didn't. It brought a lot of spiritual problems into my life, and then I began reading the Bible at the same time, and I just couldn't put it down. Just the Gospels, and that was the process. And then one day I was just sitting with a friend, and it felt like the Holy Spirit was just overflowing, and I felt like a new creature. But I always had many doubts. I said, well, especially being in scientific disciplines, it's like we can prove so many things, we can observe it. And now looking back, I realized that as I meet other Christians, it's actually a noble thing that they would want evidence, in the sense that they would want reassurance from God. They want to see the Lord at work each and every day of their lives. And that's a beautiful thing. And it can be really difficult when the Lord sort of hides himself. It says in Isaiah, surely you're a God who hides himself. And then as I read through the scriptures, it's like there are many times God hides himself, and he's testing you. He's testing to see how you're going to behave, how badly you really, really want it. And it's just like J. Warner Wallace said, you really know how your kids, how well they've instilled an idea or a principle when you leave them alone and they don't realize you're looking, and you'll see whether they behave or misbehave. And I realized that now looking back in retrospect, I was being tested, and it's perfectly fine to be wanting reassurance and evidence, but that was really, really difficult, because sometimes God withholds things. It says in Proverbs, it's the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it's the glory of kings to search it out. So part of God's glory is that he's hiding all this, and you have to really dig for that treasure, that pearl of great price that's buried in the field, or treasure buried in the field. That's just the way God delights to do things. It's to his glory. So that was a major struggle for me. And finally, when my dad was he was terminally ill, and I kept praying, and he just got sicker and sicker. He eventually passed away. That just brought a tremendous crisis in my life. And then seeing all the problems in the world, and I think what was difficult was I would ask just very basic questions. Why should I believe in the Bible? I mean, I had this good emotional experience, but as an engineer and scientist, I said, well, how can I prove that this is really true and not just a hallucination in my mind? And then I had questions about the problem of evil. So just very basic questions. How do we know God exists? Why is he hidden? And why is the problem of evil? And so many times when I was in the church, I would get either a total evasion of the question, or they'd turn the question and change the subject and make it all about me and my sinfulness. And just I resolved, if I ever found answers to these questions, I would never treat anyone like that. So going back to the debate, as some of these issues were being pointed out, I said, I'm not going to be treating my opponent, who's a proxy for the listeners on the sideline, I'm never going to treat them like I was treated. So if you wonder why I had that demeanor, I could just see myself being there in the audience and saying, okay, is there going to be at least one Christian who's not going to ridicule my concerns and doubts? So that led to my study of intelligent design, because I had bouts of agnosticism, and I just about left the faith in the 2001 timeframe. I said, I told myself, Sal, you got to be honest with yourself. You don't believe the Bible anymore. Thankfully, that only lasted for about 3 or 4 days. And I said, okay, where do I begin at this point? I mean, I can't appeal to the Bible as an authority anymore, because I don't believe it. And I just started crawling back. Could I share my screen? I have a quote.
Yeah, sure.
This is from John Stewart. Ironically, let me just share this. Ironically, it was the atheist who started my journey back to Christianity. First with Bertrand Russell and people like John Stuart Mill. So if I could share this.
You should, I have to say your story almost parallels mine in so many ways so far. And Bertrand Russell, even, I mean, I'm almost just dying over here because I can't believe some of the stuff that you said. So I'm going to get to that too. And I'd love to see your screen.
So now this is a quote by John Stuart Mill. He's an atheist, but he echoed so much of my thought process.
Oh, here we go. Okay, so if I share, add to stream. Okay.
So this is from his essay on liberty, and a Discovery Institute fellow, John Angus Campbell, he worked for the Discovery Institute and was involved in some of their intelligent design advocacy, even though himself believed in evolution, as far as I know. But he was the one, he actually memorized this passage and quoted it to me. It was wonderful. So this is John Stuart Mill. First, if any opinion is compelled to silence, that opinion may, for aught we can certainly know, be true. To deny this is to assume our own infallibility. Secondly, though the silenced opinion be an error, it may, and very commonly does, contain a portion of truth. And since the general or prevailing opinion on any subject is rarely or never the whole truth, it is only by the collision of adverse opinions that the remainder of the truth has any chance of being supplied. Thirdly, even if the received opinion be not only true, but the whole truth, unless it is suffered to be, and actually is, vigorously and earnestly contested, it will, by most of those who receive it, be held in the manner of a prejudice, with little comprehension or feeling of its rational grounds. And not only this, but fourthly, the meaning of the doctrine itself will be in danger of being lost or enfeebled and deprived of its vital effect on the character and conduct, the dogma becoming a mere formal profession, inefficacious for good, but cumbering the ground and preventing the growth of any real and heartfelt conviction from reason or personal experience. And I found that sometimes the insular environments in churches did the opposite of everything outlined there. And part of the scientific method is to take an idea and actually test it vigorously and try to actually destroy it, because when it's still standing at the end of the process of testing and experimentation, one has a lot more conviction that the idea is true. And that was something I didn't experience in the church. So then I began to go and examine intelligent design and evolutionary theory, and I realized there are actually two naturalistic origins theory. I mean, it's compartmentalized this way: abiogenesis, and then what we call evolutionary theory, which is after the abiogenesis event when there are genomes and things like that. I began to investigate it, and I said, it's nothing more than just creeds without any experimental evidence. In fact, a lot of both our experimental evidence and accepted theory actually conflicts with it. And I began to say, this really does, life really does look like a miracle. And that's when I began to crawl back. So it started from Bertrand Russell, and then I started crawling back. So you wanted to talk about Bertrand Russell.
Yeah, that's so funny, because I have to say I was raised a Catholic too, and so that part parallels. I was questioning my faith right around my 20s. I sort of fell away, and I was questioning everything, and just wondering if I just wanted to know the truth, and so it's kind of very similar that way. And then suddenly I spent a bunch of years looking at progressive Christian ideas, and very similar to your New Age. I never had telekinesis, though. I never was able to do anything, magical or anything. But I definitely thought that it was superior to listen to people like Wayne Dyer and the Dalai Lama and all of these other sorts of beliefs that kind of interwove some Eastern faiths and things like that. And so I was looking at all that stuff. And then suddenly I started having spiritual experiences about 2011, 2012 that brought me back to Christianity and let me know that Jesus is the way, the only way. And so that's what brought me back. But what's funny is I got on Twitter around 2014 and these atheists started finding me because I was doing hashtags with Christianity. And so one guy challenged me. He said, I challenge you to read Bertrand Russell's Why I'm Not a Christian, and I'll read a book of your choice. And I said, okay, you read Mere Christianity and I'll read Bertrand Russell's. And I read it and I'm like, if that's the best they have, that's not too great. So that's my story.
I was introduced to Bertrand Russell because I studied mathematics, and they had the famous Russell paradox, which is very fascinating. It was just compelling. And I'm just like, oh, I thought he was just a philosopher. I didn't realize he was like one of the most respected mathematicians. And he wrote this huge magnum opus, and it got around to the middle of this huge just a huge book. It was in the middle of the book. He said, okay, this proves 1 + 1 = 2. It was just, and that's kind of a legend in mathematics that he was trying to show 1 + 1 = 2 with all this logical edifice, and then it became I mean, it's kind of tragic, but it was so tragic it was comical that Gödel proved that Russell was wrong, and so he built all this edifice based on pure logic, and Gödel proved him wrong. And I said, oh, so does 1 + 1 really = 2? And there are fields of mathematics where that's not necessarily the way it works. And I saw that definitely when I was doing certain kinds of polynomial arithmetic to do error correction in digital systems. That's getting way into the weeds. And I'll never forget, I was sitting in math class and the professor said, here are the axioms of math. They're like the Apostles' Creed. They're unprovable. And I almost fell out of my seat. I said, you mean all mathematics is built on faith? And it's like, yeah, that's what we call axiomatic systems. And that was actually kind of what Bertrand Russell was trying to do, was to try to minimize how much faith there was. And in the process, he ended up creating something that was just a disaster. So that was kind of the spark. It's like, yeah, come to think of it, we can't prove everything. We have to be like little children. There's certain things we just accept because we can't. If we're going to be able to prove everything, we'd be God. And that was kind of the formal way. But specifically, so that's how I got acquainted with Bertrand Russell. So it had a lot more than any other atheist. Whatever he said had a lot of weight with me because of his skill in mathematics. And he also seemed a humanitarian. There's just sensitivity in his writing. But I'll share with you that, let's see, give me a moment. Bertrand, I'm looking it up right now, and I want to get the title correct.
Yeah, no, that's he definitely represents one of the higher intellects in atheism. I would probably say that he and people today like Graham Oppy and people in the past like Friedrich Nietzsche, there are some who are definitely intellectually robust.
Oh, towering. I call them the old atheists. The old atheists were far wiser than the new atheists. I know some of the new atheists will take exception to that, but I'm just like, yeah, they don't compare. These were intellectual giants. So it turned out it wasn't, I thought that, when I read Why I'm Not a Christian by Russell, it did show Russell's humanity, and I respected that. But the one that really did it for me, and the title of the essay, A Free Man's Worship by Bertrand Russell.
So that convinced you to worship. That convinced you that that gave you evidence for God?
It gave me evidence. If I could share my screen one more time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Again, just
that's so funny.
So the readers can see it.
Little do the atheists know they're bringing people to God.
Well, I talked to someone yesterday who's a C.S. Lewis scholar, and he said in C.S. Lewis's book, Surprised by Joy, he said, um, if one is an atheist, one can't be too careful in what one reads,
Yes.
because there's evidence wherever you turn. You have to sort of close your eyes to it. But there's always something there that's pointing you to God. So this was the essay, A Free Man's Worship by Bertrand Russell. It's actually a depressing essay, but it was the spark, and it corresponds to something in the Gospels. Um, it led me to something in the Gospels. I'll just read this paragraph because, again, this is when I was in my despair of doubt, and all I knew was, I said, I'd like to believe the Bible, but I just don't believe it's true anymore. And this was the beginning of what turned me. It says, such an outline, but even more purposeless, more void of meaning is the world which science presents for our belief. Amid such a world, if anywhere, our ideals henceforward must find a home. That man is the product of causes which had no prevision of the end they were achieving, that his origin, his growth, his hopes, his and fears, his loves, and his beliefs are but the outcome of accidental collocations of atoms, that no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave, that all the labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system, and that the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. All these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair, can the soul's habitation henceforth be safely built. Not that I would agree with every word there, but that was saying, gee, are you saying I'm in need of a savior?
Yeah.
That my life is not going to have, that atheism has nothing to offer me. I mean, I wasn't trying to be, I was hanging out with atheists at the time, and I said, man, it's so refreshing to be around skeptics and where questions can be put on the table and doubt and skepticism are welcome, because that, again, it echoes John Stuart Mill. I mean, there's not anyone in science that doesn't want to have his theories tested and questioned. And, the skepticism is actually valued. And then I looked at this, I was thrilled for a while. And then I said, well, where do you find meaning in life? Where's your hope? And then I read Bertrand Russell's essay. It's like, oh, he's one of the few to actually just engage it and say, no, there is no hope. There's only unyielding despair. I'm just like, well, if there's a chance of a savior, I'm going to pursue Jesus. I said, even if there's a 0.5% chance that it's true, that's better than nothing. And that relates to, I believe it's in John. Yes, John chapter 6. Simon, chapter 6, verse 68. And Jesus was saying, well, are you going to leave me? And Peter said, well, whom else will we go? You have the words of eternal life. And that sparked it. I said, I don't believe in any of the other religions. They were clearly the product of imaginations, demons, or man-made. There was something different about the Gospels with all its great historical claims that was just far more compelling. And I was thinking, yeah, okay, atheism, I'm not going to follow the other religions, and I'm not going to follow atheism. Where else will I go? And that was my experience with Bertrand Russell.
Oh, that's good. You remind when you said you read the Gospels and you read John and you had that spark. It's just like what Jesus said when he said, "My sheep hear my voice." And so you read it, and suddenly it's like God just, opens your eyes.
Yeah, yeah. It's like C.S. Lewis said, you can't study things too carefully, because if you do, you'll be pointed in the right direction.
Yeah, I love that.
And he said he was just reflecting on his life when he was an atheist. He said that he couldn't, there was just always something there, even in non-Christian literature, that just kind of just shined a light on our need for God.
Yeah, that's so funny because I love that quote from C.S. Lewis. It's something like, a young man, if he wants to remain a sound atheist, cannot be too careful about what he reads.
Oh, thank you. That's a beautiful quote. I actually don't have that book. That you've inspired me now to try to investigate it more. There's so much. Can you repeat that again? That was beautiful.
Oh, a young man who wishes to remain a sound atheist cannot be too careful about what he reads. I just love that. I think it's so funny. Because it's true. It just like when you said, here you're reading atheist materials, and actually that's even bringing you to God. And so no matter what you're reading, you're just finding that the explanation of our life. Why are we seeking meaning? Why do we seek purpose? Why do we feel like there's something better than this? Why do we question our eternity or our existence or any of that kind of stuff if that has no meaning? If cells are just random blobs and lucky mutations. And so I just don't see it that way.
Yes. And then that led to my search for intelligent design. And I said, I'm just going to work from the bottom up. And so this is from the 2001 time frame. And I spent, while I was working, I just, when I could, I'd be devouring books on intelligent design. And then I said, well, this is really amazing. I want more people to hear it. It's just natural when you feel you've stumbled on something, you just want to share it with everyone. And so I started an intelligent design group at George Mason University. And there was one other student there. Her name was Christy. And it was just the two of us. And we were praying, and we didn't know what we were doing. And we were just praying that as we were signing the papers to start the group and be officially recognized by the university, I said, Christy, we should pray that this work goes well. And while I was saying that prayer in 2004, it just, whether I articulated it audibly or just to myself, while we were saying that prayer, I said, Lord, I'd like our work to get national attention. And I don't know why it was put on my heart to pray that prayer, because I was like, that's a ridiculous prayer. There are just two of us here. We're just going to be ignored. But it was in my heart. It wasn't 3 or 4 months later, I got an email from someone named Casey Luskin, who eventually worked for the Discovery Institute. He said, Salvador, a reporter from Nature wants to speak to you. And I'm just like, how does he even know who I am?
Wow, that's awesome.
Why would he be interested in what I have to say? and that led to, and you put it in, thank you for putting it in the description. That led to the article, April 28th edition. I was in the cover story. My Christian testimony was put in the world's #1 scientific journal. I said, that was a miracle.
That is a miracle, because I know how the editors probably are a lot of times biased the other way. So that is truly a miracle.
That is truly a miracle. So, I mean, I just like, yeah, that's just one of those answered prayers. So people were wondering, I mean, to this day, I just almost laugh. I said, yeah, God's going to make sure Christian testimonies in one of the most atheistic scientific journals, Pro Evolution, is going to be there. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I actually, this is kind of a funny, I'm a little embarrassed. I actually flunked out of college, and I had a hard time getting through my first degree. It took me 9 years to get my first bachelor's because I was just a terrible student. And then when that article was written, I managed to get I had already managed to get 2 more degrees, and I was still crawling. My grades were terrible, but I wanted to learn. And so after that article was written, that's when I actually started going to graduate school. And that was a whole nother miracle, because I shouldn't have been accepted, but I was. And it was the study of intelligent design that inspired me to go back and try to take my studies seriously, even though I was just like a very mediocre, just a student that didn't want to pay attention and do his homework, which won't make you very successful in academia. But intelligent design reinvigorated my study of science, because then I could see the wonders of God. And that eventually led to my study of creation science. I mean, they overlapped, but it began with intelligent design.
Yeah, I want to actually ask you, kind of related to those points. I'm thinking about Genesis, and I'm thinking about, I've read Hugh Ross's books and his take on how everything all fits together with what he said is cosmology, because Hugh Ross is a cosmologist. And so he's looked at Genesis, and he's kind of talked about the perspective that a person would be at exactly when we had this earth was initially cloud covered. And so he had some pretty interesting explanations. But one verse that I thought was pretty fascinating is in Genesis 1:20 in the King James Version, because it talks about sort of fish turning into birds in a way, coming out of the water and going into the sky. And I thought, that's kind of interesting that that's written in there. And so I thought that gives us some evidence. But have you looked at Genesis and kind of thought about how this all fits together with evolution?
Yeah, yes. And as I said, I was a theistic evolutionist growing up. After I became a Christian, I became an old earth creationist, which is probably a little closer to Hugh Ross's views and maybe Stephen Meyer's. By the way, a lot of the intelligent design advocates are old earth creationists. There's actually one bit of actually excellent scholarship by an atheist, Eugenia Scott of the National Center for Science Education. I'm sorry, that's the acronym is NCSE, but among the ID proponents, we call it the National Center for Selling Evolution. But that's why I get the acronym wrong, because I want to get it accurate, but then in my head, it's always selling evolution. That's what they're really about. She did some excellent scholarship. She pointed out that the old earth creationists were by and large some of the major advocates of intelligent design. And so, yes, for a very long phase of my life, I had uncomfortably tried to reconcile a literal reading of Genesis, or some way of reading Genesis that reconciled it with the Big Bang and long time frames, and maybe even evolution. But evolution just began to, what did it for me, where I began to have serious doubts, was the very same book that inspired Michael Behe, who still accepts universal common ancestry. It was the book by Michael Denton, Evolution, a Theory in Crisis. And I read it, my jaw dropped. I said, I didn't really realize the theory was in that bad of shape. And when I started debating professional biologists and some who were eventually evolutionary biologists, I couldn't believe that they would, how much they avoided answering direct questions. They treated me like I was treated in church, with kind of all these ad hominem attacks and changing the subject. And I'm just like, oh, yeah, you remind me of those people I didn't like in church. I said, this is not, I know that's kind of a harsh thing to say about some of my fellow church members, but I said, that began to make me feel like, oh, gee, they don't feel very secure about their theory. So I haven't given you a direct answer. I'm a young cosmos creationist now, but that was kind of my journey. So I had all these doubts. And when I had those doubts, I said, maybe I'm going to be a little open. I began to be open to a viewpoint that the universe or life could be young. I said I wasn't convinced. I remember praying. I said, Lord, the only way I'll accept that the universe is young is if their light speed can be variable. And sure enough, around that time, all these theories of variable light speed were coming out from the secular mainstream. Of course, if a young Earth creationist invokes it, he's a crank, but it's perfectly acceptable. And I have a collection of all these stacks full of these variable light speed theories that are in the secular mainstream. So that opened it. And then I began looking at the fossil record, and I actually started, I self-taught myself a little bit of biochemistry, and I said, the chemical dating actually suggested it's, the time of death was recent. That doesn't mean that life is recent, but I said, it's a whole new ball game if the fossils are young. And then I began to, I said, but I'm physicist. I'm a student of physics. This bothers me because I respect radiometric dating, and I came from a physics background. And I had a professor when I took a supplementary, he was my professor of quantum mechanics, a supplementary course. He's actually a famous physics teacher, James Trefle at George Mason University. And he wrote the book, The Dark Side of the Universe. And he had a chapter in there that said the 5 reasons galaxies can't exist. And that was really compelling. I said, that's a strange thing for a physicist, especially someone of his stature, to say that. And he said that was one of the thorniest problems in all of cosmology. He said, by all accounts, they shouldn't be up there in the sky, but there they are. And we can't solve that problem. And then somewhere there, he relates how he was talking to some of his colleagues, and one of them said, maybe in 50 years, we're going to reject the Big Bang. And then there'd be all these whispers among the graduate students and the professors. And at my school, my undergrad alma mater, my graduate alma mater was Johns Hopkins. My undergrad was George Mason. There were 3 professors there that said the Big Bang's wrong, and they're very prominent in the physics, in the science department. And I'm just like, that's kind of interesting. I said, okay, so it's not a done deal. It's not a foregone conclusion yet. And that began to open the door. And then, so I said, okay, I'm going to go off to graduate school to study cosmology and physics. And just how the Lord works, I was considering going to Baylor to work under Robert Marks and William Dembski in August of 2007. And it was just that time that the lab was shut down because the university was anti-intelligent design, and they were punishing these academics who were favorable to intelligent design. So I went to Johns Hopkins instead, and I began to study astrophysics there, astrophysics, quantum mechanics, general relativity, cosmology. And when I was sitting in a cosmology class and they were describing their models, I almost fell out of my chair, because they were describing how in the early universe, the model, the mainstream model anyway, is that galactic amounts of matter are being pushed around at over 1,000 times the speed of light. I'm just like, wait a second. You're moving objects faster than the speed of light by factors of 1,000. And some say, well, it could be infinite. It could be 10 million. It could be infinity. I said, so it's crank when a young Earth creationist will kind of invoke faster than light speed travel, but you have no problem invoking it to patch one of your own models. I said, at some point, it's like, well, no theory is any more outrageous than another. It's just the kind of there's just a lot of prejudice. So, just at a personal level, I began to become more and more favorable. And then when I considered all these people coming out and saying that that the human genome's deteriorating, I said, you know what? For a long time, I had doubts about Methuselah and all those long ages. If our human genome is deteriorating, we're losing health and we're losing intelligence. And I mentioned that in my debate. I just like, Look, everyone is saying it. I don't know anyone that's saying the human genome's improving as far as our brains, but they're all other areas. It's not just mental, but we're having more heritable diseases. I'm just like, there may not be much left of the human species. And there have been people making dire predictions that we're not going to live. The human species won't last more than 100,000 years. Of course, someone will say, oh, we'll re-engineer humans and we'll re-genetically engineer him. And I'm just like, okay, I'll accept that for the sake of argument, but aren't you admitting then you need intelligent design to kind of reboot this? Doesn't that sort of suggest the way we originated was intelligent design? But as I considered that even secular people were saying maybe 100,000 years, and then other people were saying, why aren't we dead 100 times over? I said, well, then maybe humanity's young. So whatever one believes about long ages of the earth or other life forms existing billions of years ago, humanity is young, and that accords with the genealogy of Jesus Christ. So when I teach creation science, I say there are many problems with the model, and Hugh Ross will identify a lot of those very legitimate concerns. And I have the greatest respect for him because his organization provided a lot of material that kept me in the faith on my journey back. And when he came to my area, I personally went up to him and thanked him personally. And thank you. I said, thank you for your work. I didn't tell him I was a young earth creationist. I just thanked him so much for helping lead me back to the Lord. And so when I teach it, I say, okay, we're just going to approach this from a scientific question. And I'll say there's evidence for and against, and that's maybe all that we can do. And what I did not approve of is certain quarters of the young earth creationist community, which I'm not a part of, would just be demonizing other Christians who didn't share their views. And I totally do not approve of that. And so when I encounter other viewpoints that are articulated by Christians, it's like I try to treat them respectfully, and I will tell them when I think that their points are, their objections to the young cosmos or young earth model are actually pretty valid at this time. But the thing is, experimental evidence changes things. In 2019, it was a disaster for the Big Bang cosmology. A lot of people don't realize it, but they had an experiment, a very expensive experiment, which I presume was taxpayer funded. They're searching for dark matter, and it failed. And there's panic. There's panic in the cosmological community, because that's a very important pillar of trying to support Big Bang cosmology. And they said, well, if dark matter is not real, we have to rethink our theories. So I know that was a really long answer to your question about one verse in the Bible.
No, that's really good, because it's interesting to see how you've transitioned into these different views. You're theistic evolutionist, then you're old earth creationist. Now you'd say you're probably young earth, but you said young earth cosmology.
Yeah.
So how old do you think the earth is?
I think it's less than 10,000 years. And also, ironically, from astrophysics, there's a problem in astrophysics that it's called the faint young sun paradox. And Carl Sagan was working on it, who is like Mr. Atheist. We call him, I know this sounds so derogatory. People called him Pagan Sagan because he was very anti-Christian. And one of the outstanding problems he was working on was the problem of the faint young sun paradox. That is that the sun, if we use mainstream models of how the sun operates and evolved, the sun was emitting 30% less light during the Cambrian explosion, or the beginning of, I may be getting some of my details wrong, but if it were emitting less light around the time of the Cambrian explosion, or even before, the Earth would be an ice ball. There shouldn't be a fossil record. And that's an outstanding problem. And there have been some claims that it's been solved by global warming. They're saying that CO2 is really good for global warming, but they the, the thing is, the global warming would have to be miraculously fine-tuned. So I often joke with some of my critics who are diehard atheist evolutionists. I say, yeah, there it goes again. Evolutionary theory needs miracles to keep it working. You even need a miracle of global warming to solve the Fate-Youngson paradox, because otherwise you wouldn't have a fossil record. And to this day, they never addressed that. But because of my interest in, sometimes sometimes there are these anomalies from quarters that people wouldn't expect. And that began to be the start of my doubts of the old Earth, or at least the old fossil record. I mean, the Earth could be old, but the fossil record couldn't be that old. And then I read a book, Evolution of the Solar System. It was written by a National Academy, Stuart Ross Taylor, a National Academy member. And he wrote it. He said, I'm trying to fight creationism. This is why I'm writing this book. And then he would write all these chapters, and each chapter, almost every chapter ended saying, the problem of evolution of this planet is a severe unsolved problem in formation of the solar system. And he would do that for every planet and every phenomenon. And that, after reading the book, I'm like, you were trying to convince me creationism's false. You've probably done the best thing to convince me that God created the planets. Because at that time, I had already had my minor in physics, and I'd studied classical mechanics, orbital mechanics. And so I understood what he was describing. I'm just like, I was like, dude, you gotta be kidding me. None of this mechanics could work. And then I began reading the literature and just like, oh my goodness. So in popular literature, it says, abiogenesis seems solved. Evolutionary theory seems correct. And the solar system evolution has been solved. And then you actually read the primary literature. It's a different story. And I'm just like, well, what's the disconnect here? So when you ask, that's another long answer to your question. Do I believe the Earth is young? I would say it definitely is created. It's just as miraculously created as it's comparable in the miracle to make the Earth as it is to make the cell. The cell is more miraculous, but the Earth is also miraculously created. I don't think it could evolve.
Oh, I don't either. I think it's kind of crazy just to look at, Romans 1 tells us to go out there and just look at nature. And it's so immensely beautiful that I think it's silly to try to deny it. I can't deny it. I look at the beautiful oceans, and I could go on and on about nature, and it's beautiful. I want to quickly say, I've got a couple super chats. I want to say thank you to the people who super chatted. Taking Back Eden says, man, woman created the PC network, www. We are not inside our creation like our Heavenly Father, or like our Heavenly Father. And so yeah, inside of our creation, I think we're part of God's creation. I think that might be what he's saying. And then Sentinel Apologetics says, Sal Habibi, let's have a dialogue sometime. So I don't know if your middle name is Habibi, but I think he's talking to you. So,
oh, no, my middle name starts with a T, but I would be interested in a dialogue. It's an opportunity to promote my work. It's very kind. If you know this individual, I wouldn't.
Oh, I do. Yeah. Sentinel's got he's got probably 35,000 or 38,000 people on subscribers. So it's nice to go on his channel. He's been on my channel before.
Well, all the more. If you could put me, who's this? Who's the?
His name is Rob Rowe, and he's with Sentinel Apologetics, and he's an Australian.
Oh, I would be honored. Great.
Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, we'll set that up.
So please put me in touch, because I only have 107 subscribers right now. So yes. I'd be very honored. And it would help my work. I'm trying to reach out specifically to biology students. And we've got 3 biology students who are part of my 107 subscribers. That means a lot to me. I'm not as much out for numbers as for reaching out people like that.
Yeah, good.
So thank you.
He said Habibi is Arabic for my love. So I did not know that. So Habibi is...
Things I learned today. Thank you.
I know. I learned something new every day. Well, I want to go back to what you said, that the book you read, because I haven't read it, the book by Denton, where you said it pokes some holes in evolutionary theory. Are the holes things like the missing or some missing transitory fossils, or what sort of holes are out there?
I would say that maybe Denton's book is a little obsolete because they're better. Not that it was significantly wrong, but they're much better arguments. It did, and it's so funny. I mean, now looking back, it's like, no, I wouldn't even recommend the book now. I'd recommend what I write. Sorry, I know that's a shameless plug.
No, I think you should. Yeah, you guys can go to the description to see links to Sal's website and other places where you can get some of his materials. So,
yes, and I have I haven't written any books. I've actually, just for the reader's benefits, the last 7 years or so, actually about 6.5, I've been funded by a private foundation to do research. I actually work for various labs. My principal mentor is John Sanford, who is a famous geneticist who was an atheist. He became an atheist because of evolutionary theory in high school, but then he became a Christian at age 39, became a creationist at age 49, and most of the genetically modified organisms on the planet were through his gene gun process. So these last 7 years, I've been doing actually just biology research, which, again, my background was in aerospace and defense engineering. And so he found me and he said, you have the right skill sets. And I said, I don't know anything about biology. He said, you'll learn it. You have the right skill sets that I need for the work. And it amazed me that he could see that, yes, that it was applicable because biological systems are machines. So going back to Denton, I think I'm embarrassed to say the only thing I remember was he's talking about the origin of life, which strictly speaking isn't classified as evolution theory, but he said it's showing it's pretty bad. The state of the origin of life research must be pretty bad if they're appealing to aliens at this point to solve the problem, or extraterrestrials. That's the only thing. But then he was talking about nested hierarchies and all, and I still didn't understand that, but then I wanted to pursue that. And I said, so he does believe in common descent, but he was showing that there's intelligent design, and that reflected that still today probably reflects Michael Behe's views that there is intelligent design. It's a layer that's put on common ancestry, and I don't mind teaching that as we would call a pedagogical model. Just for the sake of argument, let's just explore it. Let's hypothetically accept common ancestry, and what do you get? And there were things that Denton was describing. It was a certain, like the avian lung or the bacterial, I think he might have even mentioned the bacterial flagellum. I don't remember, but he was talking about all these organisms that needed many simultaneous parts. And I just like, well, how can one believe this, that it evolved naturally? And he's pointing out that natural selection can't solve these problems. And then Behe took that steps further with biochemistry, but then I think the major breakthrough started to happen only like in the last 10 years, where so many of our experiments and field observations, and people will reluctantly admit this, 90% of all the things that selection will select for, if the selection pressure is strong, is for damage. So I was in a debate with an evolutionary biologist, and I said, well, what are the advantageous mutations? He said, like sickle cell anemia or elephants losing their tusks. And I said, yes, most of the evidence of natural selection being when it confers reproductive advantage is for loss of organs. I said, that's not really good for the theory. And then there was this book, Survival of the Sickest, that came out. And it tried to cite all, it was kind of, I almost laughed. I did laugh. It said, well, Darwin is a genius because he saw all the reproductive success. And one of the genius things is that loss of organs and disease is actually important for survival, and that's a good thing. And I was just like, no, but it was kind of comical, and so there's going to be a new generation of books, but that was the spark. I think more than anything else, it had a lot of credibility to me because Michael Denton was an ex-creationist, and he became an agnostic, and he still believed in common ancestry. But then he said, okay, these are all the problems out there, and that influenced Michael Behe. So I'm hoping to write on these topics and modernize, because that book was 16 years ago. 17 years ago. I want to modernize it. So
that's
maybe
great.
there are books yet to come on this. And, the last 7 years, most of my scholarly work, only 30 people on the planet would understand or be interested in, because I wrote to an audience of professors, department chairs, and deans, and I want to reach out to people in college and in high school now.
Good. Yeah. And it's always nice when people can see that because a lot of people think, oh, they're a Christian, they must not be very smart. But clearly somebody like you who's writing at this level can debunk those notions. So that's always nice to say. I want to say really quickly, I see Taking Back Eden just sent a super chat, very generous, a $10 Canadian. It says FE on most precious cents. And I'm actually not totally sure exactly what he's saying here. Selenite for $1 million, both for $2 million. Sclera, white ice wall, iris, land, sea, green, blue, pupil. I'm going to put this on here so you guys can see it too. Black like the black magnetic mountain of the center of the faceplane. I'm not sure what he's saying. I think he is a flat earther, though. He believes in a flat earth. So I think that might have something to do with that. But
thank you for the super chat.
Yeah, that definitely. Thank you so much. So anyway, so I also wanted to, I'm just going down my thing here to see if we've got some other stuff, but I wanted to also ask you actually, I know we're already at an hour, so I don't want to go too long. You can let me know if you have to run. I wanted to know if
I'm fine for now. This is too delightful.
I'm agreeing. I totally agree. So I wanted to say though something,
and maybe this isn't the last time. So.
Oh yeah, definitely. I like you mentioned that I might be able to come on your channel. You can definitely come on my channel again. I would love that. So
yeah. So if there are things that you'd like to talk about, and honestly, I don't know whether I really want to do debates. I don't think that they're the most productive, because I would. It's like, okay, I would definitely agree to a 5-day debate, because in a 1-hour debate, people can bluff and dodge, but in a 5-day debate,
you got them.
Yeah. It's just like, what was that quote again by C.S. Lewis about careful?
Yeah. A young man cannot be too careful about, a young man who wishes to remain a sound atheist cannot be too careful about what he reads.
Well, you see, a 1 or 2 hour debate is not being very careful about what one reads or studies. A 5-day debate is careful reading and studying.
Yeah.
It won't be the same debate if it's 5 days in detail. And
I agree.
And so how that related, that's why I would prefer venues like this than having to, have treat things in a very shallow manner in a short debate.
You've got a taker here.
Oh my goodness! Yes. And in fact, I mean, I'm being very sincerely true, because I'm finding when we get into the details of evolutionary theory, I have to throw the whole suite of biochemistry, cellular biology in there, and molecular biology, a little bit of biophysics. It's like, it's not going to be an easy. This would be for specialists. But the reason I had the privilege of reaching out to deans of biology departments or chairs is I could speak their language. And if I were just saying garbage, they'd pick it up just like that. And it's like, we don't want to hear from you anymore. And so it's a different level when we're arguing that. And that's what I'd like to share. The difficulty is kind of making it succinct and clear for people who are non-specialists. So this would be very interesting. So if we have that 5-day debate, we're on. That's going to be fun.
Yeah, that sounds.
The way it would be conducted is I'll address. I doubt someone would want to be my opponent just because of the time commitment. But we could look at literature and critique it, and I'll debate the points. And I will invite people to some of these. I could tell you that some of the biologists, some of the stuff I put out there, they don't even show up. I say, challenge me on this. I'll debate you on this topic. Let's talk membrane transport and eukaryotes, how that evolved. They don't even show up.
Yeah.
Or I'll say, how about the problem of the different phospholipids in archaea versus bacteria versus eukarya? They don't even show up. And it's like, these are major anyone who's actually in biology would know that this is a serious problem. But anyway, you could see it gets me very excited to, boy, I would just relish the opportunity for a 5-day debate. That would be just so awesome.
I definitely think, now Rob is a Christian. He's a really good guy, and he's the one who's interested. He's a taker, and so he does run some very long videos. He's had some 6-hour videos, so he definitely is one of those. So you guys could film it and then bring out little bits and pieces of it, of what you, or even film certain parts of it, or however you wanted to work it. But that would definitely be interesting to listen to.
And what is the gentleman's name? I'm terrible with names and faces.
It's Rob Rowe with
Rob
Sentinel
Rowe.
Apologetics. And so I'll put you guys in touch.
Like Rob Lowe, the actor.
Yeah, exactly. It rhymes with Lowe. Yeah.
I'm terrible with names and faces. It's led to a lot of embarrassment in my life.
Yeah, I'm pretty bad too with that. I try to. It's one of those things when I've got other professor friends who can memorize the students, all of the students in the first day. They know all the students' names and all of their faces, and it takes me a while to get it, and it's kind of embarrassing. So I also wanted to ask you. You mentioned, and I don't know if you're willing to share this, but you mentioned a little miracle in your own life in 2018. I don't know if you want to share that with
yes,
the crowd.
I'm taking care of my 94-year-old mother. She's actually behind the pictures there, just for privacy, of her great grandchildren. Those are my great or grandnephews. She's actually awake, God bless her. June 2018, like June 1st or May 31st, they sent her home to die. And people in the church, they set up a hospital bed in this very room, the hospice care providers, and they sent her home into that bed to die. There are a lot of medical professionals in my family. Both my sisters are nurses. We didn't think Mom would live very long either. I thought she had only 7 days to live. And this room was filled with people from my church, and they were just praying and weeping over her. And we were all kind of saying goodbye. Well, I told the Lord, I said, we're not here on earth forever. And I'm just not ready to say goodbye. I said, Lord, it'd mean a lot to me. I mean, that may not, I don't know that that's, I mean, when you're in distress, you just say it like it is. And that's how I felt. And she recovered. She was out of hospice care. Let me just share more details. She had a urinary tract infection that wasn't diagnosed. Normally, I can totally tell all the symptoms, but this time, no fever. I didn't smell anything, and it just got worse. And she lost her ability to talk, to read, write, and walk, and she stopped wanting to eat or drink. And she couldn't, at one point, she couldn't even recognize her children. She didn't recognize my sister. She just was like wondering, who's that woman? She was losing her. I thought she had a stroke. And there's some things you learn about medicine the hard way. And I realized, well, it definitely wasn't a stroke, because for a number of reasons, but I didn't know how to handle it. And just before I took her to the hospital, I said, Mom, I want to take you to the doctor. And she's just she's very stubborn and strong-willed and kind of crotchety. And she said, no, I'm not going. Take me to Popeyes. And so she'd always had me taking her to Popeyes to get her fried chicken. I'm like, Mom, I want to take you to the hospital. I was thinking, I need to take you to the emergency room, but just refused. And I had to, when I take her to get chicken, I had to practically carry her back in and out of the car. And so anyway, miracle of miracles, her doctor said, and I described all the symptoms, because she, at that age, when they're always sickly, you can't really tell. because it always seemed like, especially like the last 5 years, she's always at the brink of death anyway, and we just don't know. Anyway, she recovered after those prayers. She was able to walk. She was able to talk. She was able to regain her ability to read and write and recognize faces.
Wow.
And it put a new perspective on life. And I had a feeling that this was important for me because this is an important time to be doing apologetics, and I just couldn't be dealing with losing my mother at this time. And so this is a real bonus. I'm probably here today because God worked that miracle and answered that prayer.
That is amazing. I love that. So that's you're giving me hope. Actually, it's because my mom is actually older too, and she's not as old as your mom, but she's 79, and she has Lewy body dementia, and she's pretty much practically lost her ability to talk. And so I'm going to say some prayers and see if somehow something can happen, if it's in the Lord's will. So we just put it in His hands. But
yes.
That's beautiful story. I think that.
Well, no, I'm actually glad you asked me. And, I'm not the evangelist type. I'm not like Ray Comfort that can just go up to people and start. But when that miracle happened, people, I used to go to a pizza store. Yes. Now you know what kind of my tastes are in food. I go to Papa John's like every week whenever the local team, the Washington Nationals, win. We get half price pizza. And so I go to the pizza store and they say, "Hey, nice to see you." And they say, "How you doing?" And I said, "I just thank God my mom's alive. They sent her home to die, but people prayed and she's recovering." And that was my little witness. I said, I've never gotten flack for witnessing that way. Everyone will appreciate a miracle. And I said, I'm more afraid if I don't give glory to God for what He's done in my life, if I kept it silent. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share that with people.
Yeah, it's so amazing. I think, it's funny when I have people on my channel and you come in here, I didn't realize you had this miracle in your life. And I had Susan, she's in the chat right now, Slam RN is her name, but I had her on my channel and she said, and I said something like, "How did you come to faith?" And she just sort of slips it out. "Oh, and then there was that miracle." What miracle? And she was on her deathbed very similarly. And suddenly, she felt that God was going to give her a second chance. And He did.
I have to look up that video.
Yeah. So I have it on. I have the short version of it too on my, because I actually isolated that portion, and I'm going to isolate I've made notes on a couple of times in this video that I'm going to isolate for a shorter little knowledge nugget. And so I want to go ahead and do that.
Well, I'd love her on my channel. This is when I teach, just as an FYI, when I teach apologetics, about 90% is evidential. So about 65% is 60 to 65% is creation science, intelligent design, and 15% is 10% archaeology, 15% is personal testimony. Mm-hmm. And in the last year, my private apologetics group, we've had 100 meetings in 1 year, and the favorite topic is personal testimonies, what Jesus has done in the lives of His people. That is always, creation, archaeology is probably the most boring. No slight intended on archaeologists. But the thing that really touches people's hearts is what Jesus has done in people's lives. And I thought the best apologetic that I ever saw in the Bible was the blind beggar. He said, "I was blind, now I see." It's like, I
love that. The Pharisees are harassing him, and he's like, "Oh, what is this? You didn't." He's like, "That's all I know. I was blind, now I see."
See, amen.
I love that. No, I've had, that's what brought me back to God is Jesus personally, spiritually started giving me I had a couple of visions. I had a couple of dreams. And I actually audibly heard His voice at one point. And so that was in 2016. And so I believe with all of my heart, but it was funny because I wanted to share this with these new people on Twitter because I went on Twitter. I somehow accumulated about 20,000 followers or something like that, or 21, I think I have. But so I go on there and And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, everyone is going to be so, they're going to hear my personal testimony. It's going to bring them to God. And the atheists are like, no, sorry, I'm not going to believe your testimony. And why should I believe you? So then I thought, okay, I guess I need to go find some evidence. So I started looking into apologetics and reading the Bible and doing all that kind of stuff to really, firm up my message.
Well, it's funny, the word apologetics, it's tied to the idea of legal defense. And the times it's used in the Bible, the outcome, at least from a worldly standard, didn't look that favorable. Because in Acts 26, Paul, he said, I look forward to making my defense. And the word is apologetics. From the same root word we get apologetics. Yes. And he appeared before King Agrippa and Festus. And Festus said, you've lost your mind. And I kind of looking back, I said, that's kind of not the most pleasant story, because I wanted to hear how everyone was going to be saved. I'm so happy. And everyone just responded terribly to Paul. All the names there, they just ignored him, thought he was mad. And he was just giving the testimony of what Jesus did in his life. Mm-hmm. And I'm finding it's so I was trying to teach my apologetics private group. I said, don't expect it to change any hearts. Look at Acts 26. What changes people is God's work, because that's the same Paul who stood before Sergius Paulus. And in that case, God worked a miracle. Elymas the sorcerer was there, and mm-hmm. Paul said, the Lord's going to strike you blind. And then the Roman official was just like, wow, he believed. And it's sometimes God is just going to really be very evident, and then he's just going to let you just defend the faith, and he's not going to work a miracle. And mm-hmm. that's what I see when these atheists are kind of saying, well, they'll hear your testimony and they'll just reject it. I said, well, that's the model in Acts 26.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to Master Blaster.
20,000 Twitter followers.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy. I want to say really quickly though, Blaster Master, Sal has pretty much addressed that question. He wanted to know if you found information that convinced you that evolution is the best explanation for the diversity of life. Would that affect your belief in the God of the Bible? And I think we actually already discussed that, because Sal has been a theistic evolutionist, and he's so really as far as I can see it. No matter how we got here, I'm going to give credit to God. It's to be glorified in God. It's God's glory. So,
well, I'd like to respond to that question. I probably, when I was a theistic evolutionist, I did not hold the Bible in as much regard as I do now, in terms of, meaning I was willing to say, maybe it was in error, or maybe we don't have the best manuscripts. Where I am now is I have a lot more regard for the Bible that we have in hand. Mm-hmm. It's more sacred, and as a matter of faith, I accept that in the original manuscripts, it was divinely inspired and inerrant. But I could say for a lot of my time when I was studying intelligent design, I wasn't committed to that as much as I am now. And so yes, it would have affected me. And I would have to say it would still affect me if we had very compelling evidence that evolutionary theory is correct, mm-hmm. or universal common ancestry. But I'm at this stage in my understanding of things that I just don't see how it could be right. And that's the subject of the 5-day debate.
Yeah, that's good. I think it's really interesting. One of the things, just to point out, just so people know this, in the Population Reference Bureau, they've estimated that 108 billion people have walked the planet, and they've estimated that about 57% of those have come after the year 1 AD. And I think that that's really amazing, given that, how many are in the Christ era. And so I think that's something that we can think about in a positive way.
Yes. Well, that's news to me. I didn't know that. And see, all these anomalies just keep popping up, and I'm just like, okay, let's just say there's no foregone conclusion, and that would actually help some of the creationist and biblical models.
Yeah.
And I find the mainstream just really reluctant to say, oh, we might be wrong. And it just does not, I said, in any other field, like if you're designing airplanes, you want to know if you're wrong because people's lives depend on it. But when it comes to origins, it's just a different mentality. And I find that personally disturbing, that they ought to be a little bit more cautious than they are.
Yeah, I think so. I feel like there's definitely a bias there. Just like you said, if you're an intelligent design person, you're getting harassed really in the university. And I think that's pretty bad. But I also wanted to just make mention of, oh shoot, wait a second. I just lost my train of thought. I was thinking about, dang it, what was I going to say? It'll come back to me. I just had to think for a second. But I know what I was going to say. I have had, you mentioned, who Hugh Ross is, and he's a cosmologist. And I had him on my channel a few times. But the last time I had him on was because we looked at his book on climate change. And what he found that was really interesting is they took these measurements going back into the glaciers up in the ice cap, and they were looking at different atmospheric conditions. And they realized up until about 9,500 years ago, the atmosphere was like this. Just very, very volatile. That's why we had humans who were hunting and gathering back then, because they didn't have good conditions to really be able to plant crops and trust that they would be able to deal with that. And so then he said, right around 9,500 years, it's so amazing. You see all this in the atmosphere, and then all of a sudden it's like this.
Flat lines.
Yes. And it's like somebody's holding something. I mean, to give God credit here, it's like, it's perfect. It's, the conditions are just like they are right now, and it's absolutely perfect. So, I mean, there's a little teeny bit of, you see a little bit of.
And there are all these, all these coincidences, and people just want to just brush them over. But it's like that, the evidence is telling you something. You ought to listen.
Yeah. And that's the same thing when Hugh Ross has looked at the evidence that the Earth has and all of the conditions that that the Earth has had to meet that are truly amazing. And so it's.
Oh, yes.
I mean, that's another thing. You think they found one other planet that has 2 habitable zone conditions that the Earth has, and we have over 10 or maybe even 11 at last count. And it's things like how big the moon is relative to the Earth, and how it's stuck like it is, and it sort of goes. It's keeping our gravity the way it works with it, and how Jupiter is positioned exactly where it is, because that's really helped to take on some of the meteors. And there's all this stuff.
In fact, now that you mentioned that, I think it was his essay in the book Mere Creation, which is a take on Mere Christianity. He wrote an essay in the book, Mere Creation, edited by William Dembski. It included an essay by Hugh Ross. And it's exactly what you were. When I read the huge list of the fine-tuned parameters, I said, yeah, God did it.
Yeah, I know. And the atheists will not like to hear that you said God did it. But it's like,
or a miracle did it. And I often say, okay, could we say miracle? And, it's like, well, okay, if there's a miracle, there has to be a miracle maker, because fine-tuning is, the amazing thing is, that's not a philosophical thing. That is a scientific observation. If something isn't this way, not only are we're dead, much less can we be able to do science. And some atheists said, I believe in science. I said, science is a miracle, because one part of fine tuning that is neglected is there's not going to be any science if there's no fine tuning. It's not really it's a very technical argument where there can't be any science unless it's fine-tuned. It has to do with what they call algorithmic complexity and a number of other things. But even on a more basic level, if we don't have eyes to see, ears to hear, minds to think, there's not going to be any science anywhere. So there's, to say you believe in science, it's like, well, it's a gift that you shouldn't have. I mean, the universe could be lifeless. There's not going to be any science. Why is it? Why does science work so well? And a number of thoughtful people who weren't Christians, like Einstein and Nobel Prize winner Wigner and others, they're like, that's the deepest mystery of all, is why science even succeeds.
Why everything's not just random. randomly and just crazy. So why is it everything so well ordered in so many situations? And just even the earth with the ocean, the percentage of water, there's all this stuff that is just really amazing. Have you ever given any thought to how consciousness arose? Because that's another argument with evolution, is the leap from one life form that's unconscious to suddenly we've got us, these highly sentient beings.
Yes. In fact, the two things that changed me to become a creationist of some sort, I went from theistic evolutionist to old earth creationist, is even when they were teaching us I remember in high school, 9th grade biology class, they're saying this evolved from this. And I said, well, how is it that chemicals can start to feel and have emotions? It's like something doesn't add up. And as I began to study computers, that same question came up. It's like you can make a computer, you can teach it and program it to have all the right responses to pain or pleasure or things that are interesting. You can build, will it ever have a human-like experience that we do of our own existence? And I said, that's not, something doesn't seem possible to evolve. And amazingly, as I began to study physics, there are all these little things like there's a book called The Quantum Enigma of Consciousness. And they said it's just one of those things that science can't explain it. I mean, we can understand neurons and all, but consciousness itself, we can't explain. And there's some that are so bold even to say that it's actually probably it's more important than atoms to the foundation of the universe. And that may sound outrageous, but I was taking statistical mechanics and thermodynamics in graduate school, and there was this author there by the name of F.J. Belinfante, very respected physicist. Before I took that class, I happened to have one of his books, but it really stood out that his name was in my other textbook, because that means he's a serious guy, seriously respected. His book, Quantum Mechanics and Time, Objective Quantum Mechanics and Time Reversal, he said quantum mechanics requires that there be God. I'm just like, that's an unusual statement coming from a physicist. And it was just like 2 paragraphs in an otherwise just purely technical book. And then in 2005, a professor at Johns Hopkins, my alma mater, Richard Kahn Henry, who is the Henry Roland Professor of Physics and Astronomy, so very high position there. He said, yeah, quantum mechanics. He wrote an essay that got published in Nature, prestigious scientific journal. He said the universe is mental and spiritual, and he was arguing that if we just took quantum mechanics seriously, even though there are other interpretations, he said one valid interpretation is the most fundamental part of the universe is a conscious God, and then us being in the image of God. He didn't say this, but I'm just now extrapolating that consciousness is probably more fundamental than atoms. One can extend that, and that's why that book, the Quantum Enigma Consciousness, was very fascinating. I didn't have, unfortunately, the time to read it, and I've since lost the printed book, and that's why I've now gone to mostly Kindle now, so I don't lose books so easily. But evolutionary theory didn't explain consciousness, and that was the beginning of my serious doubts. I said it can't, as a matter of principle, explain it.
Yeah, no, it can't. And I think I like how you put all that too. I think that's great. And so if we've got people, I know we have some atheists who are in the audience. If anyone wants to pop in a question or two before we tie it up, that'd be fine. I know we had a question before, so I'll just tag me if you want to ask a question of Sal, and so we can go on that way. But we've talked today about all kinds of interesting things. If you've just joined, you'll have to go back to the beginning, because we talked about a lot of scientific things. If you don't know and you're wondering, who is Sal? Sal Cordova was on Modern Day Debate, debating an atheist on evolution, and he did a great job. And I thought he was really a gentleman to this other person, and so and a good example of a Christian. And so we've got great stories in here with miracles happen in Sal's life and some other really good stuff. So. So Sal, what else haven't we touched on yet that we could bring up?
Well, actually, I'm more interested now to hear your story and all the other stories here, just like Slam RN. And I think maybe as we wrap it up, if you hear from your viewers that there are topics they'd like to explore, you can suggest them to me. And if we can fit it in an hour, we'll attempt. And so that's, I think we kind of covered it all. I mean, in terms of a nice overview. Probably the last thing I'll say, I've studied apologetics since I got saved, which was 1978. That's almost 42 years ago.
Wow.
Not in various levels of obviously of detail, but the fundamental question is, why do I believe in God? And the way that blind man said it is, I was blind, but now I see. And even though we don't have miracles to most people in the 21st century are not as accessible as that. On the other hand, God has left a witness in biology, in archaeology, in the cosmos. Just as Del Tackett said, just paraphrasing, and also really C.S. Lewis, wherever you turn, there's just this hint of the Lord at every level, from the atom all the way to the cosmos. There's, as I've studied this, you know, I could go through hours and hours and hours and piles of literature, but then you'll see that one paragraph that just sticks out. And so, yes, it's easy to ignore if you don't read carefully, but when you read carefully, it says something of the Lord. So what that has to do with our present day, I've often said, of any time in history, this is the time. We have more evidence available to testify the Christian faith than any time since the age of the apostles, barring direct miracles and personal experience. But we have all this technology to probe the cell, to tell us that there was a intelligent designer that is so far beyond us in terms of wisdom and power. And I can say that because I hear, I was just reading a quote. In my debate, I talked about the bird magnetic perception. It has a compass that uses quantum spin entanglement and spin chemistry, very sophisticated stuff. It's able to hold that quantum state longer than any, in the molecules, it can hold that state longer than anything we can do in the laboratory. And I hear this often now that the biophysicists are studying biology. They're saying the way this does this, it's better than anything we can do. And that always, I'm just like, yes, you know, and Jesus said, consider the lilies of the valley. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed as one of these. And when I first read that 42 years ago, it's like, yeah, you know, I mean, I'm not trying to disrespect the Lord, but you know how it is. Sometimes you read something in the Bible, it's like you don't know what to do with it. And it's like, you know, he was saying it's here today, and then it withers and it's, you know, tossed away. And it's like, well, then how is it arrayed better than Solomon? That just doesn't make sense. And, you know, grass is something we walk on. It's kind of despised. And now that we look at the cell, and he was also pointing to birds, when we look at the photosynthetic cycles and the Calvin cycle in plants, and then we look at birds, Jesus specifically referenced the birds in the plants. And now that when I started studying it, I'm just like, in plants, it uses a lot of solid state physics. It uses quantum quasi-particles called excitons, and solid state physics wasn't my favorite subject in school. But I was like, we had some pretty high-level Nobel Prize winning scientists being able to build solid state systems that could use quantum quasi-particles, and here it is in the plant. And it's like the technology was there all the time, hidden away. And so I was like, yeah, those verses, Jesus probably had this century in mind. We would find out that they are arrayed far more than Solomon in all his glory. And we've only touched the tip of the iceberg. So in terms of evidences of the Christian faith, we probably live in some of the most exciting times, barring direct miracles in our personal lives, on evidential grounds in study of cosmos and biology and even archaeology. It's better than it ever has been. And if the Lord tarries and civilization doesn't fall apart, I expect there's going to be even more exciting times in the future.
Oh, I think that's really fascinating. I do have a couple of questions that came in here. Wait, let me just get to the first one. Wait, hold on one second. I'm gonna, you guys, the people who wanted me to send a link, I've actually got to get running in a few minutes here, but so I won't be able to do that, but I am going to have an open chat tomorrow. And Sal, you're welcome if you want to come on, but I just put a link out there that's completely open.
I'd be happy to come to the open chat, and please feel free to invite me. And
yeah, I will. I'll send you.
Going to be needing a little help soon, so I'll try to answer quickly. And if we don't get to it, we'll do it another time.
Okay, so one of the questions was on the speed of light, and I think you already kind of mentioned about variable speed of light, but I think we can maybe cover that another time. Yes. But the other thing that I just wanted there was another question on Exodus that I think we can address pretty well. This one, it says, does Sal know that Moses, the Exodus, and the 40 years desert wandering is now considered myth by historians and archaeologists? I've actually done some videos on that where they actually shown that some of the archaeologists and historians have all gambled on this one particular date for this one particular king and to be the pharaoh. And there are people who've come out with alternative hypotheses on which king and when. And so I wanted to say that. But the other thing I just wanted to point out really quickly is that if you guys think back to the Exodus and you realize that these people were kind of circling around for 40 years, isn't that a little embarrassing? And do you think that if this is a falsehood that someone's trying to peddle, that they would make up a story where people are walking around the wilderness for 40 years, or that the apostles one of the apostles denied Jesus and they were doubtful, and his family tried to stop him, and all the stuff that Sal mentioned with Paul having such struggles at the end of Acts. And we see all this stuff. If this is a sales book or a sales pitch, give me a break. That's an awful sales pitch when it has this embarrassing stuff in there. But people were compelled to tell the truth, even if it's embarrassing.
And my response is, I don't have a good response today. But as I said 42 years ago, there are a lot of things that I didn't have good responses for, not because of lack of Christians wanting to find, but the answers just popped up. We have so much now today. And so I'd say the trend is very favorable that we'll discover things. But the question I pose is, if humanity's young, that suggests that we were created specially, and that accords with the genealogy of Jesus Christ. If one believes in Jesus, then it's easy to trust all the other accounts in the Bible, even if you don't have direct proof. Just like that blind man. I was blind, but now I see. So I think of these like Slam RN here, who was given a second chance. She has all the proof she needs. And I totally respect the question, because I'm a skeptic too, and I think that's valuable. I hope someday that problem is solved. And I want to say it's good that we acknowledge problems. And so I'm not going to be one to try to just say it's not a problem. I look forward to the challenge, and I believe the Lord has something in store for us.
Yeah. And I think he's got a lot in store for you. I think he's prepared you so well to be able to speak on science and these topics that I cannot speak on at all. So I'm actually trying to help my son study for his biology in high school. He's got a biology class. So I've been reading the book with him. And it's so funny because it's like, that's not an easy subject. I don't care what anybody says. And you're so it's got a lot of really complex topics, even in high school. I mean, I look at this and I'm like, oh my gosh.
I'd be interested. I actually want to see, I want to read through high school biology textbooks. So that'd be a very interesting thing to do, because I'm trying to have some biology classes on my channel for non-specialists.
Oh, really? I'll have to get my son to watch that, because that's the class he's kind of struggling in the most. So that's why I've been studying it alongside him, trying to teach him it as much as I can. So, well, thank you so much, Sal.
Actually, I would look forward to, so I'm trying to work with some homeschoolers. Is your son going to public school?
He is. Yeah, he's
okay. I'm trying to learn how to teach these topics, because one way to learn something is to teach it. So that's actually one reason that's actually the main reason right now I'm trying to teach classes, is so I can learn things. So
that's what they see. I've been a member, and I've also been on the board and of this group called the National Society for Experiential Education. And that's actually exactly what they say. The best way to learn something is to have to teach it yourself. And so when you're forced to teach it, you have to learn it, and you want to learn as much about it as you can, in case people have questions that you don't want to be able to not answer.
Yes.
So
yes.
Good. Well, thank you so much. So Sal, how can people find you? And if you want to share also what you're working on or any of that kind of stuff, that'd be great.
The way they can find me is it's in the description hopefully it's in the description.
Yes, it is in the description.
It has the website and then my YouTube channel. So that's the best way. But just as a mnemonic, www.evidenceandreasons.org is the website. It's not a good website right now, but one can find the link to my YouTube channel by the same name by clicking there, and it'll the YouTube channel is more built out now. So as far as what I'm working on now, creationists have a hard time publishing in peer review that's anti-evolution, but we're welcome to publish in medical research or cancer research. And so I'm doing work in what they call structural biology, proteins, and bioinformatics. And we can do research there, but we can't really say, oh, this won't evolve. But at least we learn how well the systems work. And then in another venue, we'll say why this can't evolve. So that's actually what I'm working on.
It's a good way to do it.
Yes. I've been alerted by an editor in a secular venue, mainstream, that a publication of mine has been accepted for publication. So when that comes out,
congratulations.
Yes, thank you. Well, we'll see.
I know how hard that is, because I've been as an academic, lots of rejections. I mean, you get a real thick skin after a while.
And we're still trying to. We've had 7 rejections on one paper where editors have said your conclusions are absolutely right, but we're not going to publish. So that gave us motivation, and that's a whole nother story. And this was an anti-evolution paper that they said we were correct, but we're not going to publish. So that's a whole nother story that.
Wow.
And so we're working on trying to get this through. We're already at our 7th rejection. And so, there's been funny stories there too, because some of the people that helped me prepare it, their bosses rejected it. And it's like, well, your employee told us it was right. You don't want it. So
that is such a bias, though. That's terrible that they do that.
Yeah, because it's going to make the whole industry look like it's stupid, which, I do think a lot of it is close to a farce. It's a harsh thing to say, but I think that's one of the reasons they won't publish it is even though they know it's right, they don't want to be the guy that has to do the deed and accept it for publication. They'll hear from their colleagues.
Wow. Yeah, we've got to get people like Cy Gart and others to get on those boards and be editors in those kind of places. Cy's a biochemist who's come to Jesus, and so
praise God for him. And I know he's a theistic evolutionist, but he's a good guy.
Yeah. Oh, you know him too. Yeah, he is.
I don't know him personally, but anyone who has worked and done what he does, that's a great victory that the Lord has placed him in that position. So praise God for him. It's a great, wonderful testimony.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, all right, well, everybody, please go over right when you get off this. please go down to the description, go to Sal's channel and go ahead and subscribe. I'm going to do that. I actually realized I haven't subscribed yet. So I'm going to subscribe right after I get off the channel here. And so I want you guys to all do that too. And please like the video and subscribe to my channel too, if you'd like to come back, if you'd like this kind of content. And again, thank you so much, Sal, for sharing the good news today.
Thank you. And God bless you. Take care.
God bless you too. So here's how I'd like to end this. So whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all in the glory of God. So thank you. I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast.